Hey guys, Andy Yan, spoken label, my friend here, the wonderful Alistair Lawrie. Okay, Alistair, take it away, mate. I know you're going to do a selection of poems for us, mate.
Okay, I'll begin with the poems, Andy, that we discussed. The first one is Sandy, first poem in my new volume, Open Petals. Gay wealthy folk were Sandys. A' the land out west of here was there, but nae a bit of gweed they had out. Elke bairn they got was daft. Another loon could manage squeal, but then would dirt himsel by morning prayers and had to be sent hame. A mad hoose took 'em a', excepting Sandy. For kept himsel together well enough, it seemed, and fit was handed out to him for folk he met, or mair than likely picket on. And nae a word of plaise, but I was guess, a peach, an apple, pennies, files a bitty out, whatever it might be, but mostly it was fags he cricket after. Een I hung fout his mouth whenever he would speak, or lurked beneath the bonnet he I wore. He wouldna sign his name to out. Fit's mair, if askit till he'd ging fair wild and spit and snarl and swear, a sair delight to us as bairns, for never held the almanny swear at a', or never when they thought that we were listening. Athin he did left us feared kine, but I forwondered at his tricks. It was a dancey day from walking up a street. He'd birl around, sound loup and clap his heels together, whiles he was lilting out, "Hey, to Belatho, or fitted a monkey day," timing with his clicket steps. Yon was, you'll ken, as daft and fu' o' joy for us as bairns as when he stood directing traffic wi' muckle coddling in the town's main street. Peer soul, nae doubt he was. But he bid on for years on his ain terms until, grown all, they tidied him awa' a home, for ne'er a bath he took, but kept his bonnet on. Moving on, I'll come to the second poem that Andy and I discussed, which is, it's a memory of an incident in Glasgow, watching people come back from the Glasgow Rangers winning the European Cup in 1972. But it's basically a poem about my father. It's called Follower. Glasgow Central Station, May 1972. Empty train tracks, racks flat out until the blaze of summer's evening sun aslant. Aneath the girdered glass far licht near blinds me and swashes through the glare the years atween, the new and then, and long ere then, far travels cross, forgether. Atween ae blink and another, as place for ince at rest, and me here thinking of my father as a loon, for man he kent it well, whilst following his team. Syne I blink mair, and new wise are filling up with lazy, jostling waves of men, streaming, shouting, singing, blue on blue their shirts, blue scarfs and bonnets, an endless swaver tide of men as trackled with travel, drink, and joy. They staggered fusionless, but heading for the nearest pub, whilst draining off the dregs of Spanish carryouts, their empty bottles left like driftwood in their wake. The sky was sunny summer's blue, and blue was our in the rain and in their throats as they swirled on to follow, and on they came. I'd never seen as muckle blue or as muckle joy at e'ense, and though I'd never like it fitba, I thought about my father, following his days. Although we were 200 mile apart, still he stood stands yet aside me, his hand still upon my head. Through near on 50 year, and him no long awa, I hear that sang in his soft voice still whispering round my ears. The next poem is based on the picture of a young sheep, a ewe, that I stood opposite all day in an exhibition once. And it's the closest I've come to a religious poem. Pucket means runt-like, but not quite the runt of a litter, which would be a sharga. So puny. Pucket yow. You're nae a sharger, Pucket yow, although a bitty sma. You're een licht square up in the world, and show nae fear at a'. There is a douceness round your moo, and yet ye arena blate to set your bowed heed firm in full acceptance o' our fate. The innocence it drew us yow, for sicker little kent fu muckles here in ilka line o' him it represents. And the last of the ones that Andy and I spoke about is in English, and it's lighter. Elephants can't jump. There's always elephants in my room. I don't know why they're there. Perhaps they've come to make me think, or maybe just to stare. They're quite thick-skinned, and deaf and blind to all appeals to move. They turn their backs and wave their trunks to show they disapprove. My jumbo book of behemoths has come alive, you see, and now all these leviathans are settling in with me. Republican in sentiment, they seem to have no leader, and there is no way I can stop these proboscidea. There's one that hides behind my wife, and though she's small and frail, the only bit that you can see, its little curly tail. The puppy's cornered one behind the television set. It packs its trunk into the hole where mousetraps have been set. The one on talks of God's forgiveness of all sin. Mind you, that one's not in the room, but broadcast through the ether, unless, of course, it's flat and square, and not so fat either. A mammoth's whistling Dixie, but I'm woolly as to where. The mastodon still trumpets on to and try to keep her eyes tight shut. These pachydermous quadrupeds are making such a muddle, I wish some circus man would come and bring along his shovel. They're here, they're there, they're everywhere, they're licking my tea plates, this jostling, trampling, smelly throng of five-toed ungulates. And when we start to speak to them, or kick them in the rear, then each of them tries to pretend that none of us are here. I'll read two other poems. These are from an earlier collection. First one is about my grandfather and the last time I met him. It's called Touching. He never was one much for touching. Apart from toozling the brow-creamed hairstyle I'd laboured to perfect, and, of course, his tests of strength, like arm wrestling with a leathery vice. His tightly buttoned, collarless grey shirt strained against the muscles of his neck. And always he would eye me carefully as if to see how I would deal with it, and always, too, his hand squeezed mine until it hurt, and then beyond, then stopped, just as I knew that he could crush it if he chose, but then he never did. Instead, he'd barely nod and smile, and let me go as if I'd passed the test. And so I had, and so I did. Each time he clasped my hand, and each time I'd be a little stronger. But not enough until that final testing, as I left his bed, where he ignored the women fluttering their concerned avoidance of the truth that gnawed inside him, where his pyjama top, still buttoned all the way, hung loosely like the skin around his neck. Oh, aye, it was just then his eye seized mine, and raised his hand to mine, and gripped. I gripped, and I still feel that grasp in mine, and see his eyes locked on my face as mine were held on his, and neither one would loosen until we kent we'd passed the test, and gave each other that slight nod and smile, as men will sometimes do, each trying to accept the fact we'd never meet or touch again. And finally, a poem called Anna's Brucey, that is in Doric again. We kent that Anna's Brucey wasna recht, even as Mearns. He smiled o'er muckle files, and something soft like lounged about his face to hing his lips and keek foot his een. Ah, timorsome, yet hungered for our ploys. And fine he was to hear own, aye willing as he was to do aught he was telt. But mine we got them do some awfu' things, like when he showed his cock to Mistress Bruce, or like the worm he swallowed, hale and wriggling, yerded with dirt. Aye, sunny afternoon, when dogs were watching for the shade, tongues hanging out, as het the tar was melting on the roads, its fat, wheat bubbles targets for our sticks. That was the day that Brucey came to play bare knacket. Of course, at first we looked and snichter till oursel it's sick I feel, but then ere lang the tar's sweet scent had catched us with a sticky sense of deeing wrang. So nobody noticed Brucey till he sat his doup full squat recht in amongst the tar, and syne he rolled about till that his face, his arms, his legs, his hair were clotted. A' the time he sloughtered there, he laughed and yowled with it we took for joy. Aye, so much so that we a' stared and wished we could, but kent we couldna dare, fine though it was to watch. We heard his mother's gate, and ran, and left him there, her anguished shouting trailing us along the street to hame, and far beyond, and still I hear her greet, and still I see him plighter in the glower of tar, and still can feel that freedom that he felt, that we were feared to then as now. It was that year that Brucey jumped out his father's car's back door to die in Ethavan. Our doors were possibilities to Brucey. We still look the other way, or run away in fear, and tremble at their near approach. And that's me.
Stuff. Oh, check out to the gallery. Great stuff. I really enjoyed hearing it then, because it was like when I was trying to read it back to myself, Alistair, when obviously I get prepared for the interview, I was reading it back to myself in an English accent. So hearing it in
Yeah,
yours in your like Gaelic like that, it really added a richness to the reading actually there, it did. That's why.
there is
So
a
it's
richness to
yeah.
the Doric. There's a lovely quote. I presume we're not recording, but there's a lovely quote
We
by.
are, yeah.
We are okay.
Yeah.
David Ogston, he was a cousin of Sheena Blackhall, who's a prominent local poet in Doric. But poor man died in his early 50s, and he was a minister. But he wrote an autobiography in Doric. And speaking of the, he says he says ken, even when we dinna think about it. Is alliteration a feature of the way we speak and the way we write? And when we spoke about Doric earlier, I'd underline the fact that writing, skriven is the word we would use for writing. Skriven in my own tongue's important to me. Ogston, in the same book, speaks about his experience as a boy wanting the validity of print until he read Grasset Gibbon. And he felt that Grasset Gibbon gave him that validity, gave him permission to be able to write about his own experience in his own tongue. And I would want to do the same for others.
Yeah, no, I understand you with that. So, brilliant stuff, mate. It's indeed makes sense. I agree with you. Great quote. Thank you again today, Alistair. It's been an absolute pleasure. I have thoroughly enjoyed this one, mate.
Just before we go, I'm just thinking, is it Ian McMillan? Is that wonderful poem about being mocked at school by his English teacher for not pronouncing something by Keats or some other romantic classical writer, and being angry and outraged and somehow justified later when he discovered that Wordsworth would rhyme water with matter, and just his own feeling of being. There is a tendency in English to focus everything on the RP of Oxbridge. I mean, your own accent is as broadly different to that as mine is. And it is just as valid. And some of us might argue even more valid because it's less tired.
I like that. Yeah, I do, mate. Yeah, I get you. One good point. So, right, mate. Anyway,
okay, awfully good to speak with you. Keep in touch, Andy, because
please do as well, mate. I definitely will.
Enjoyed our crack.
Me too as well, mate. So,
and I'd like to hear more about what you're writing and about your own book.
We'll come on to off camera in a minute then. So let's get this wrapped up for you, mate.
Yeah.
Probably enjoyed. Right, guys and girls, as Don Callis over at AEW Wrestling says, stay safe and stay over. And we will see you all next time.